Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're looking at the newly released Battlefield 6 and seeing how it stacks up technically and from a gameplay perspective to the fan favorite from 2011, Battlefield 3. For this video, both games are being played on a PC, with the settings cranked up as high as they go at a native 4K resolution. Battlefield 6 will be utilizing DLAA to improve its visual quality further, and post-processing effects like motion blur, vignette, chromatic aberration, and film grain will be disabled when possible. Alright, so let's kick this comparison off by first discussing the presentation, starting with an in-depth look at some of the shared, or in other cases, closely shared, weapon models. Both Battlefield 3 and now Battlefield 6 offer a wide range of firearms to choose from, many of which, in the former game, were added post-launch via paid expansions, but are all available from the get-go in Battlefield 6 as part of its launch offering. You'll find a lot of your favorites have made a return here, like the M4A1, SCAR-L, G36, UMP, P90, M249 SAW, M39, and the Saiga-12. Though there are a few guns from Battlefield 3 that you won't see return, like the good old M16A3, the F2000, ACR, MG36, and plenty more. In their place, Battlefield 6 does give us a few different, perhaps more modern guns like the HK433, the Galil Ace-32, and the Bullpup Grot B10 FBM-1, referred to in this game as the GRT-BC. As for the design and complexity of the weapons themselves, there's no question that Battlefield 6 has evolved visually over its 14-year-old counterpart, with much more advanced meshes, 4K texture maps, and more sophisticated light interaction. Even the keyframed weapon firing and reload animations look better. All that being said, we do have to give BF3 some credit here. These weapon models still look fantastic, with loads more detail than any of the competitors at the time. I especially love the little personal details put into each gun, like the wrapped stock and worn look of the M16, and of course that old wood finish for the AK, RPK, and SVD. Even still, Battlefield 6 does come with substantially more weapon customization than Battlefield 3 ever had, with a full suite of attachments that we've come to expect from more modern shooters, and the freedom to load up guns with several attachments, as opposed to BF3 where you were limited to one scope, barrel, and underbarrel attachment. BF6 also offers a weapon blueprint setup, similar to the latest Call of Duty games, referred to here as weapon packages, that not only offer preset optimized attachment configurations to equip, but unique skins for the weapon. Next up, we have the soldier models. Here we have a slightly more mixed scenario. On the one hand, Battlefield 6's character models are most definitely a step up technically, with much more detailed uniforms, higher resolution textures, and more variety thanks to the more unique design of each customization preset. But I'd argue Battlefield 3's soldier model designs are simply better overall due to their more recognizable silhouettes, as this greatly assists with gameplay readability. The only identifiers used in Battlefield 6 for classes are those small shoulder pieces that can only be seen from certain angles. Considering class customization outfits are still unique to classes, I feel DICE could have done a much better job differentiating these soldier models, and giving us more unique full-class silhouettes like in Battlefield 3, rather than what we've ended up with in Battlefield 6. Next up, we have the vehicle models. Vehicle models generally do look better in Battlefield 6, with the same observations that we made before, like high-quality geometry, textures, animations, and even physics in most instances. I also appreciate the effort put into bringing in lesser-known vehicles for the Pax Armada team, like Leopard tanks and the EC665 Tiger Eurocopter, rather than sticking to the old T-90s, Havocs, and Vatniks from the past. Still, I can understand players missing the Russian faction here, and it would be cool to see that faction eventually added in with an update, especially as an option for Portal players. But as it stands, Pax Armada have replaced them, and while NATO has replaced the US Marines from Battlefield 3, their arsenal is generally the same, with only minor alterations like the Apache and Blackhawk in place of the Cobra and Huey, the F-16 and F-22 in place of the Super Hornet and A-10, the Bradley in place of the LAV, and the Flyer 60 and ATVs in place of the Growler and Humvees. Mechanically, these vehicles all still serve the same purpose, and like with the weapons, you can expect a lot more customization options from them, with different ammo types, defenses, and cosmetic mods. However, I was surprised to find that jets don't have any sort of customization at all in Battlefield 6, and neither do the gunner seats for attack helicopters, which feels like a huge missed opportunity. You'll also find that the scout helicopters, including the fan favorite Little Bird, don't make a return in BF6, which is a shame as it probably would have suited these smaller urban maps better than the attack helicopters do currently. Next up, we have the environments. This has been a big talking point surrounding Battlefield 6 ever since the beta this summer, as many fans expressed disappointment with some of these smaller, more infantry-focused level designs offered at the time. And while there are a few larger maps in Battlefield 6 at launch, I do feel that in general, these maps still feel a bit on the small side. Battlefield 3 itself also had a similar approach to its levels, opting for slightly smaller designs due to it being developed heavily for less powerful console hardware at the time, like Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Because of this, infamous explosive spam-laden levels like Operation Metro felt overly claustrophobic on PC, as 64 players were crammed into lanes designed around 24. Sen Crossing, Tehran Highway, Grand Bazaar, and Damavin Peak all similarly felt much smaller than the types of maps fans expected at the time following the previously PC-exclusive entry, Battlefield 2. Though this was balanced out by the much larger maps like Caspian Border, Karg Island, Operation Firestorm, and to a slightly lesser extent, Noshaar Canals, that all offered that quintessential Battlefield experience with jet fighters, helicopters, tanks, and all. The game was also followed up with a remarkably large collection of follow-up maps that expanded that scale further, including throwbacks to Battlefield 2, the massive sprawling offerings of Armored Kill, and the much smaller Close Quarters expansion. Battlefield 6 does appear to be taking cues directly from Battlefield 3's design philosophy, with a larger variety of map sizes to benefit multiple player bases simultaneously. You have Merak Valley, Firestorm, and Liberation Peak for those large-scale experiences, Sobek City, Manhattan Bridge, and Siege of Cairo for your medium scale, and the more close quarters Iberian Offensive, Empire State, and Saints Quarter. It's an alright lineup, and I appreciate the overall variety of locations along with the strong emphasis on making multiple modes actually play well with each map, unlike Battlefield 3, where a lot of these maps felt more tuned for Rush than Conquest. Though BF6 certainly could have benefited from one more large-scale map to round it all out, something that matched the feel of something like Gulf of Oman, Wake Island, or Armored Shield. Merak Valley is certainly large, but its limited boundary size and more linear layout of its objectives does give it this condensed feel, more so than a map like Caspian Border. As for the actual technical quality of these environments, there's no question that Battlefield 6 feels generations better than what came with Battlefield 3. The level of detail is expanded in every direction, with much more clutter like 3D rocks, trash, and decor, vastly superior draw distances, higher res skyboxes, and overall, much denser scenes. Operation Firestorm demonstrates these upgrades the best, as giant barren fields on the south end of the map are now decorated with large boulders, vehicle wrecks, and other bits of cover that make infantry movement more manageable. Interior areas also feel properly decorated for once, something that the Battlefield series has struggled for ever since its inception. Next up, let's talk about the game's lighting. Lighting is one of Battlefield 6's biggest standout improvements over the likes of Battlefield 3, as BF3 was always criticized for its overly filmic presentation, using an excessive amount of post-processing effects like lens flare, camera smudges, and this blue-tinged filter to achieve its semi-realistic appearance. It still looks decent from an art perspective, but it did get in the way from a gameplay perspective, and made some levels incredibly one-sided due to things like the blinding sun effect. Battlefield 6 opts for that realistic look as well, but it's not relying on any oppressive blue filter anymore. Maps are instead more naturally lit with the engine's light rendering tools, and so you get very distinctive color grading depending on the environmental assets and the position of the sun. It helps a great deal in giving individual maps their own unique identifying feel that was otherwise missing, and does give the game a very real-world feel. Exposure adjustment seems to be a problem in Battlefield 6, as light transitions between exterior and interior areas seem to be overdone, making it extremely difficult to see targets at times, an issue that Battlefield 3 didn't suffer from nearly as much. Reflections are also more technically impressive now, using higher res cube maps and screen space reflections, rather than solely relying on cube maps like in BF3. And the quality of the light maps used to simulate things like global illumination are vastly improved over the individual light probes and light map hybrid methods used before. Similarly, shadow maps and point light shadow projections are much more impressive as well, and you'll find a lot more samples of these types of features on full display nearly everywhere you go, as fixed light fixtures in environments like this one will project the player's shadow in real time, and can even be destroyed, removing that directional light as expected. BF3 did have some very slight light and shadow manipulation, though it wasn't nearly as sophisticated as what we're seeing in BF6, where light will actually fill into rooms with open windows and doorways, and really expand once destruction plays into it. Which brings us to our final technical topic, the effects. Battlefield 6 cranks up the insanity with its signature destruction effects, while purposely maintaining its predictability in gameplay. This means if you shoot a wall with a rocket and destroy it, that wall will always create the same hole every time, though it might not seem that way at first, due to the dynamic particle effects that surround this initial destruction. This is more or less how Battlefield 3's destruction functioned. So to expand on it further, BF6's destruction involves the idea of pancaking, where projectiles in the environment, say a turret that's been blown off of a tank, can hit other destructible objects and cause a chain reaction. This sometimes can cause impressive building collapses, on par with the kind of scripted Levolution stuff we saw in BF4. Only this is happening all the time, and can turn the streets of Cairo, Gibraltar, Tajikistan, and Brooklyn into complete chaos at a moment's notice. I especially love how rubble piles not only crush objects and players like in BF3, but leave behind these piles of rubble that can be used as cover, or used to reach the now exposed upper floors in the destroyed structure. Heavy air vehicles will even crush weaker ceilings if they land on top of them too forcefully, causing them to drop down below into the warehouses of Firestorm, or cause a chain reaction that breaks off large chunks of the high-rise apartments in New York. Now, all that being said, I was disappointed to see that Battlefield 6 does not feature any form of fully collapsible structures outside of scripted events like this crane, or this building in the single player. Structures in Operation Firestorm demonstrate this point very clearly, as certain buildings in BF3, like this office structure, could collapse in on itself if enough support walls were destroyed. This same building in Battlefield 6, however, will always stay standing, which feels like a bit of a step back to the days of Bad Company 1. Another disappointment here is that Battlefield 6 doesn't seem to feature water at all, especially not in its gameplay. There's no rivers, no lakes, no oceans to cross. Every map is fully landlocked, so there's no need for rib boats or attack boats either, taking away another major component that made games like BF3 and BF4 so enjoyable. That's not to say there's no water effects to be seen along the borders of maps like Manhattan Bridge or Empire State. And there's this tiny little reflecting pool in Cairo, along with some small fountains in other maps. There's also some bits in the single player where water rendering is obviously being utilized, and actually looks pretty decent. It's just these multiplayer maps at launch, for whatever reason, aren't offering any form of water in its gameplay, despite BF3 offering it in nearly half of its launch maps. Fire effects and explosives are at least a huge improvement in BF6 over BF3. All the fire alphas, smoke layers, and particles are incredible to witness as you battle across the deserts of Firestorm or the streets of any of the highly destructible towns. It's probably one of Battlefield 6's most impressive visual aspect, and I love all the ways the destruction system interacts with them to make for some cinematic Michael Bay-style moments. BF3 looked great for its time too, but those explosions have not aged particularly well, and certainly aren't up to par with what we're seeing in this latest game. Now, let's shift gears here and talk about the gameplay design, or rather highlight some of the biggest changes that returning players from Battlefield 3 can expect with Battlefield 6, starting with the core movement. BF3 offered relatively smooth soldier movement for its time, with fluid vaulting animation, dive to prone, and clean animation blending to tie it all together. BF6, of course, sees newer versions of these animations return, but also includes things introduced in later Battlefield games as well, like vaulting up onto higher ledges, combat rolls, crouch sprinting, and getting into the supine position. It all feels much smoother than BF3 does, and I appreciate the work the core combat team have done to help improve the feel of the movement, especially after the missteps made with 2042. That being said, I do still prefer Battlefield 3's dive to prone animation, with the player holding the gun with both hands as they hit the ground, as this made for a more visceral feel than the two-handed approach in BF6. Another change is to the class configuration, especially in how weapons are divided out. Now, I've already spoken to this ad nauseum at this point, so I don't want to belabor the point anymore. But BF6, as it stands, doesn't have the same emphasis on class play as any of the other mainline predecessors. Assault, Engineer, Support, and Recon all have access to the entire roster of weapons in the game, with only small incentives to use those more traditional class-specific weapons, like increased ADS speed for Assault when using assault rifles, or reduced scope sway for recons using snipers. BF3 offered a fair compromise at the time, in that every class had access to certain weapons like shotguns, SMGs, and DMRs. On top of this core change, a lot of the gadgets have been moved around too. Recon, for example, has their C4 again, whereas Support had the C4 in BF3. Spawn beacons are now the Assault's job, forcing Recon to focus more on intel and sabotage. Support also has to handle both ammo and health this time, as their support box provides both resources, forcing the Assault class that previously acted as the medic to focus on pushing the front line and killing enemies. There's a few other small tweaks, like Support getting a smoke launcher, and new gadgets added to the pool like Assault's ladder, Support's trophy systems and shields, or the Engineer's new and improved EOD bot. But other core functions of each class remain about the same as you remember. Vehicles are, of course, another area that I feel was handled a little bit better in Battlefield 3, especially the air vehicles, as jet handling was significantly more manageable before, and more enjoyable as a result. Flying a jet in Battlefield 6 is fine, especially with that cool Top Gun maneuver you can perform by angling your thrusters outward, but rolling the plane weirdly rotates around the top of the rear tailblade, rather than the center of the body itself, making it nearly impossible to perform maneuvers like knifing through these towers in Firestorm. The helicopters similarly feel too heavy in Battlefield 6, making it difficult to perform evasive maneuvers like diving quickly to avoid rocket fire. And so, enemy RPGs are likely to be a much bigger threat to pilots. Tanks also feel a bit clunky and unwieldy in BF6, with inconsistent damage for different shell types, slow movement, and annoying third-person camera controls that limit turret speed to balance the game for controller players. And then you have things like the gunner seats not offering any upgrades, and an excess of rockets and AT mines on the ground, making heavy vehicles almost impossible to use in the more infantry-centric maps. With all this, you can begin to more clearly see why Battlefield 3's vehicle play may have been better to start with. Though again, there's still a lot more upgrades for other vehicles to play around with than BF3 ever offered, along with much better effects to make tank battles, helicopter crashes, and other common occurrences feel way more immersive, along with better physics in some instances that help to balance it all out. So we'll just have to see how these things are evolved further as the game progresses. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you feel offers the best sound quality and design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Battlefield 6 is visually a major step up from the likes of Battlefield 3, with higher quality weapon, vehicle, and soldier models, vastly improved explosion, smoke, and destruction effects, and much better infantry control for its core combat. Things like being able to drag your wounded buddy to cover, or being able to use a sledgehammer to smash open walls, mounting on low cover, dropping backwards into the supine position to shoot enemies, range finding with the sniper rifle, automatic target painting, permanent specialty gadgets to better define class roles. All of it helps to further enhance the gameplay experience and can make returning to the likes of Battlefield 3 a bit difficult, even if you do happen to find one of the few active servers left in it. However, the map variety isn't quite up to par with what Battlefield 3 has offered, both at launch and especially when considering all of its expansions. Vehicles are also not as much fun to control as those similar vehicles in BF3. And while I didn't speak about it during this video, I will say briefly that the campaign in BF3 was more impressive than the campaign on offer in BF6. BF6 offers a decent start in getting back to all this, but it's not there yet. And I hope the developers continue to listen to feedback from the community to help get us back to the level that we were already at 14 years ago. Even still, BF6 is a blast to play, and easily one of the best Battlefield games in years. So fans of Battlefield 3 will no doubt appreciate the effort that went into making a modern version of one of their favorite entries to the series. But what do you guys think? Does Battlefield 6 scratch that Battlefield 3 itch? Or were you hoping for more? Let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more Battlefield 6, among other games coming soon.